Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Manga Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The city skyline stretched like a jagged horizon beyond the glass windows of Daniel Cross's apartment. It was evening, and the amber glow of streetlights below cast shifting shadows against the polished floors of his home. A home he had once filled with dreams of family, stability, and love. His hands rested heavily on the back of the chair, knuckles pale against the dark leather, as he stared at the table where it all began to crumble. The email sat open on his laptop. The words were damning, revealing more than Daniel ever wanted to know. Elise, his wife of 6 years, had been meeting someone, a colleague from her PR firm. Daniel's piercing green eyes darted over the email again, dissecting every detail. The timestamps, the locations, the careless intimacy in the language. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern. He straightened, his mind racing with questions that fought to drown out his rising anger. Why? How long? Did she even regret it? Or had he become just a placeholder in her ambitious life? Daniel took a slow, measured breath, trying to calm the storm that churned within. His upbringing had taught him to stay silent, to not rock the boat, but this was different. The truth had come to him not through Elise's confession, but by accident. Earlier that day, he'd been at work, pulling late hours on an architectural project that had consumed him for months. A colleague had forwarded him a file, and amidst the clutter of work emails, a personal message meant for Elise had landed in his inbox. It wasn't addressed to him. It wasn't meant for him, but its contents, a meeting arranged at a downtown hotel, signed off with a name Daniel didn't recognize, had drawn him into a world he never imagined existed. Now, back in his apartment, Daniel's thoughts shifted to Elise herself. She would be home soon. Their conversation tonight would define everything if they could salvage what was left, or if this betrayal marked the beginning of the end. The front door creaked open. Elise's heels echoed against the floor, each step amplifying the tension in the room. She was dressed impeccably as always, her tailored blazer accentuating the poise she carried in her professional life. But tonight, Daniel noticed something else. A slight hesitation in her gait, an avoidance in her gaze as she set down her bag. "Daniel," she said lightly, her tone careful, rehearsed. "You're still up? Everything okay?" He gestured toward the table where his laptop sat open. The email was displayed in bold relief against the dim light of the room. "Elise," he began, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk." Her eyes flicked to the screen, and in an instant, the composed mask she wore began to slip. Elise's gaze fell to the screen, her expression a mixture of surprise and dread. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Daniel felt the weight of it pressing against his chest, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "Daniel," Elise's voice was softer now, her usual confidence replaced by hesitation. "What is this about?" "You tell me," Daniel said, crossing his arms and leaning against the edge of the table. His sharp features were cast in shadow, his green eyes unreadable, but piercing. Elise's hands trembled as she reached for the chair in front of her, gripping its back for support. I don't know what you're implying." "Implying?" Daniel's tone turned sharper, cutting through the pretense. "The email was sent to the wrong inbox, Elise. My inbox. So I'm asking you, what am I reading here? A misunderstanding? A mistake? Or the truth you've been hiding for months?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She sank into the chair, her fingers curling around its arms, her posture collapsing under the weight of his words. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice shaky. There's nothing serious going on. It's just work." Daniel exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "Work? Is that what you call meeting a colleague at a hotel under a false name? Work?" Tears welled in Elise's eyes, but Daniel didn't soften. Not yet. He'd spent a lifetime swallowing his instincts, pushing down his needs, trying to be the steady, understanding partner. Tonight, he wanted answers, not excuses. "Elise," started, then faltered. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything. It just happened." Daniel's laugh was bitter, hollow. He turned away, pacing to the window. The city lights flickered below, a million tiny lives unfolding in oblivion to his. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less resolute. "That's what you have to say? It just happened? Do you know what it took for me to trust you, Elise? After everything I've been through?" Elise wiped at her eyes, her makeup smudging slightly. She looked younger, smaller, more fragile than the woman he had married. "I know," she whispered. "I know what I did was wrong, but you've been so distant, Daniel, so wrapped up in your work. I felt invisible." Daniel turned back to her, his anger giving way to something colder, something heavier. "So? What? You found someone who made you feel seen? Someone who filled the gaps I couldn't? And instead of talking to me, instead of giving me a chance to fix it, you made this—" He gestured at the email. "Your solution?" Elise flinched but didn't respond. Her silence was an admission, a surrender. Daniel moved to the table, leaning down until their faces were level. "Do you love him?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with pain. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head furiously. "No, God, no, it's not like that. I don't even know if I like him. It was attention, Daniel. It was a distraction. But it doesn't mean I don't love you." Daniel stood upright, laughing again, a sound that carried no humor. "You love me? Is that supposed to make this better? Make it okay?" "I was stupid," Elise pleaded. I thought I needed something more. But I don't, Daniel. I need you. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." For a moment, Daniel considered her words. He had loved this woman. Truly, deeply loved her. And even now, despite everything, he wasn't sure that love was gone. But trust? That was another matter entirely. "You'll end it?" he repeated, his voice hollow. "And then what, Elise? We just go back to pretending everything's fine? That this never happened?" She stood, her hands reaching for his, her voice frantic. "We can move past this, Daniel. I know we can. People make mistakes. Marriages survive worse than this. We can survive this." Daniel stared at her hands, so small and delicate against his. Once, those hands had been his comfort, his refuge. Now, they felt like a stranger's. He pulled away, stepping back. "I don't know, Elise," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can survive this." The weight of his words settled between them, final and irrevocable. Elise sank back into the chair, her head in her hands, as Daniel turned toward the door. The city outside was unchanged, its rhythm steady and unyielding. But for Daniel, the world had shifted irrevocably. And as he walked out of the room, he realized that no matter what came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the apartment was eerily quiet. The usual hum of the coffee machine, Elise's soft humming as she prepared for her day, the shuffle of Daniel's notes, all were absent. Instead, the silence felt suffocating, pressing against Daniel as he stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the untouched cup of coffee he had poured himself an hour earlier. Sleep had been elusive. Every time Daniel closed his eyes, he saw the email, heard Elise's voice, her hollow excuses echoing in his mind. He had spent the night alternating between anger and sorrow, between disbelief and a gnawing sense of betrayal. And now, in the harsh light of day, nothing felt clearer. Elise had left early. Her absence wasn't surprising. She often left the house before him, her PR job demanding early starts. But today, it felt different. The usual note she left on the counter, a simple "Have a good day, love," scrawled hastily in her elegant handwriting, was missing. The void where her words should have been mirrored the emptiness Daniel felt in his chest. He picked up his phone, staring at the screen. A message from his sister Sophia blinked at him. It was simple. "Call me." Sophia always seemed to know when something was wrong, an almost unnerving sixth sense honed by years of seeing Daniel struggle silently through life's challenges. He dialed her number, and she picked up on the second ring. "Danny," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "I had a feeling I'd hear from you today. What's going on?" For a moment Daniel said nothing. The words caught in his throat. But Sophia's patience was endless, and eventually he found his voice. "She's been cheating on me," he said, the admission coming out as a whisper. Even saying it felt surreal, like describing someone else's life. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Elise?" Sophia asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes, I found an email. She's been seeing someone from work. And she admitted it last night." Sophia didn't rush to respond, letting the silence stretch. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured. "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? The one Daniel had been wrestling with since the confrontation. What was he going to do? "I don't know," he admitted. "I can't just pretend it didn't happen. But part of me wonders if I should try to forgive her. She says she wants to fix things." "Danny," Sophia said gently, "you don't owe her forgiveness. That's something she has to earn, and even then, it's your choice to give it. You have to think about what you need, not just what she wants." Her words settled heavily on Daniel. He had spent so much of his life prioritizing others. His mother, who left when he was a boy, his father, who struggled to hold their fractured family together, and Elise, the woman he thought he could finally trust. But where had that left him? Alone in a kitchen, questioning his own worth. "I need to clear my head," he said finally. "I need to figure out what I want." Sophia's voice softened. "Take the time you need, and remember, you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you." After they hung up, Daniel grabbed his keys and left the apartment. The city was alive around him, its energy starkly at odds with the turmoil inside him. He wandered aimlessly, the familiar streets blurring into an indistinct backdrop. His feet carried him to a small cafe he used to frequent before his relationship with Elise consumed his world. He ordered a coffee and found a seat by the window. As he sat there, sipping the bitter drink, memories flooded his mind. The first time he met Elise, her laughter lighting up the room at a mutual friend's party, their long walks through the city dreaming about the future, the way she had held him after his father's funeral, her presence a balm to his grief. How could someone who had been his anchor now be the storm pulling him under? A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Daniel?" He looked up to see Alex, a mutual friend of his and Elise's. Alex's expression was cautious, as though he already knew something was wrong. "Mind if I sit?" Alex asked, motioning to the chair across from him. Daniel nodded, too drained to argue. Alex slid into the seat, his usual easy demeanor replaced with concern. "I heard something," Alex said carefully. "About Elise. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but..." Daniel raised a hand, stopping him. "It's fine, Alex. I know. I found out last night." Alex exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I'm sorry, man. I didn't want to believe it." "Neither did I," Daniel said bitterly. "But here we are." Alex hesitated, then leaned forward. "Listen, I don't want to overstep, but you deserve better than this. Elise, she's always been about herself, you know? I didn't see it at first, but looking back, it's obvious." Daniel stared at him, Alex's words sinking in. Was that true? Had he been so blinded by love that he missed the warning signs? "Thanks," Daniel said finally, his voice subdued. "I appreciate it." As Alex left, Daniel remained at the table, his coffee cold and forgotten. He had come here seeking clarity, but instead he felt more adrift than ever. The life he had built with Elise now seemed like a house of cards, beautiful but fragile. collapsing under the weight of her betrayal. The question remained, what was he going to do next? The apartment felt colder when Daniel returned, the kind of cold that seeped into the walls, into his chest. The quiet was oppressive, and for a moment he stood just inside the doorway, letting the weight of the day press against him. Elise's shoes weren't by the door. She wasn't home yet. Part of him was relieved, grateful for the temporary reprieve from seeing her face, and the questions it would inevitably bring. He set his keys on the counter and poured himself a drink. The whiskey burned on its way down, but it didn't clear the haze in his mind. He walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Elise was going about her day, the same as she always did. Did she feel guilt? Remorse? Or was she simply waiting for the storm to pass, confident he would forgive her and things would go back to normal? A sound broke his thoughts. The unmistakable click of the door unlocking. He didn't move, didn't turn around. He heard her steps, hesitant as they crossed the threshold. "Daniel?" Elise's voice was soft, unsure. "You're home early." He turned then, the weight of his gaze pinning her in place. She looked different, her usual poise replaced with a nervous energy that crackled in the air between them. Her coat hung loose over her shoulders, her bag dangling awkwardly from one hand. "I needed time to think," Daniel said, his tone even, controlled. "Something I imagine you've had plenty of, too." Elise swallowed, setting her bag down. "Daniel, please. I know what I did was horrible. I know I hurt you. But I've been thinking too. And I want to fix this. I'll do anything." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Anything?" "Elise, you don't even understand what you're asking for. You want to fix this, but you don't even know what's broken." Her face crumpled, tears brimming in her eyes. "I do know. I know I made a terrible mistake. I let myself get swept up in something that didn't mean anything. I wasn't thinking about what it would cost." Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. "Not thinking? You planned meetings, Elise. You lied, again and again. Don't tell me you weren't thinking. You were thinking. About yourself." Her tears spilled over, but he couldn't find it in himself to feel sympathy. Not now. She stepped closer, reaching for him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "Elise, do you even know why I'm so angry? Do you understand what this has done to me?" She hesitated, her hands falling to her sides. "I betrayed you," she said finally. "I broke our trust." "Trust," Daniel repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "Yes, you broke my trust. But it's more than that. You took everything I believed in, everything we built together, and you threw it away for what? Attention, validation, a thrill." Elise flinched as though struck. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "It wasn't about him. It was about me. I felt lost, invisible." Daniel's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Invisible? Elise, do you know how many nights I've stayed late at the office, not because I wanted to, but because I was building something for us, for our future, and the whole time you were finding yourself in someone else's arms?" Her tears turned to sobs and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I know," she choked out, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, Daniel, don't give up on us. We can rebuild this. I'll prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with." Daniel stared at her, a mix of anger and sadness roiling within him. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that the woman he married was still there. But the truth was, he wasn't sure. The Elise he had loved felt like a stranger now, her actions carving a canyon between them that felt insurmountable. "I don't know if I can do that," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't know if I can ever see you the same way again." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with desperation. "Daniel, please, I'll go to therapy. We'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job if that's what it takes. Just tell me what to do." He shook his head. This isn't something you can fix with promises, Elise. This isn't about you anymore. It's about me, about what I need to feel whole again. And right now, I don't know if I can find that here." She rose, moving toward him, her hands outstretched. "We can figure it out together," she pleaded. "Don't give up on us, please." Daniel stepped back, the distance between them feeling both too far and not far enough. "I need time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need space." Her sobs grew louder, and she collapsed onto the couch once more. But Daniel didn't stay to comfort her. He walked to the bedroom, packed a small bag, and left the apartment without another word. As he stepped out into the night, the city's hum surrounded him, grounding him. He didn't know where he was going or what his next steps would be, but one thing was clear. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of something new. The motel room was sparse, just a bed, a nightstand, and a desk with a chipped surface. The wallpaper was a faded beige, the kind that seemed to absorb memories but revealed none of its own. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. The screen glowed faintly in the dim light, dozens of unanswered messages from Elise staring back at him. "Daniel, please call me. I can't stop crying. Please, just talk to me. I'll do anything to fix this. Just tell me what you need." He turned the phone face down on the nightstand and leaned back against the headboard, letting out a long, weary sigh. For the first time in years, he was alone, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of it pressed against his chest, heavy and unfamiliar. Yet beneath the ache of betrayal, a quiet voice whispered something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. For so long, Daniel had shaped his life around Elise, her ambitions, her needs, her insecurities. He had made them his own. But now, stripped of the illusion of their perfect marriage, he found himself asking a question he had avoided for years. What do I want? The answer didn't come easily. It lingered in fragments, pieces of a self he had long buried. He thought about architecture, how he had chosen the field not just for its practicality, but because he loved creating spaces that felt alive. He thought about the friends he had drifted away from, the hobbies he had abandoned, the dreams he had shelved to be the partner Elise needed. He closed his eyes, the silence in the room filling with the echoes of a life unlived. The next morning, Daniel found himself in an unfamiliar diner, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted faintly of burnt beans. He was scribbling on a napkin, sketching the bones of a building he had envisioned years ago but never pursued. It was a rough outline, nothing more, but it felt good, grounding. He was so absorbed in the lines and angles that he didn't notice when someone slid into the booth across from him. "Still drawing, I see," came a familiar voice. He looked up to see Sophia, her face creased with concern, but her eyes warm. She set her purse down and leaned forward, studying him. "I called the apartment," she said softly. Elise answered. "She told me what happened." Daniel's stomach twisted, but he nodded. "And you came here to tell me to go back? To try and make it work?" Sophia tilted her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Danny, you know me better than that. I came to make sure you're okay. And if I'm being honest," she reached for the napkin, holding it up, "I came to see this. It's been a long time since you let yourself dream." He looked away, a lump forming in his throat. "It doesn't feel like dreaming, Soph. It feels like running away." "Maybe it is," she said, setting the napkin back down. "But maybe you need to run to figure out where you're going. It's not wrong to take time for yourself. You've spent so long trying to hold everything together for other people. Elise, Dad, everyone. When's the last time you held something together just for you?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Sophia's words settled over him. Heavy, but true. That evening, Daniel drove to the edge of the city, where the skyline gave way to open fields and winding roads. He parked on a quiet hilltop, the horizon ablaze with the colors of sunset. He stepped out of the car, letting the cool wind whip around him. For the first time in days, the ache in his chest eased, replaced by something he could only describe as clarity. He thought about Elise, about the life they had built and the cracks that had formed long before her betrayal. He thought about her tears, her pleas, and the sincerity in her voice when she said she wanted to fix things. But sincerity didn't erase what had happened. Love wasn't enough to patch the holes in their foundation. Trust was what held everything together, and without it, the structure would always be unstable. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through her messages one last time. Then, with a deep breath, he typed a response. Elise, I need more than love to move forward. I need time, I need space. I don't know what the future holds, but for now, I need to focus on myself. I hope you can do the same. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then powered off his phone and slipped it into his pocket. The wind carried the sound of rustling leaves, a quiet symphony of endings and beginnings. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him. When he opened them again, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the first stars were beginning to appear. He smiled, a small, tentative smile, and turned back toward his car. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like his own.